The new Ohio Department of Education and Workforce is now about 3 months old. The agency was created in the state budget to do something that governors going back to Dick Celeste and George Voinovich have wanted: more gubernatorial control over education in Ohio. The new agency, known as DO, has assumed authority over academic policy powers that were held by the State Board of Education. A lawsuit attempted to stop that, but a Franklin County judge's order allowed it to move forward and for Governor Mike DeWine to appoint a director. He is Steve Dackin, a former superintendent who'd served as state school superintendent for 11 days in 2022 before resigning over questions about his access to information about applicants for that job. I talked with Dackin about his new role this week.
I have to first give kudos to the interim state superintendent, Stephanie Siddons, and then Chris Woolard, and then Jessica Vololini, who then served as the interim director of the new agency during this time period. They did a phenomenal job of, under pretty trying circumstances, given the uncertainty of what was going to happen with legislation and so on, but they kept the boat going, rowing all the oars in the right direction. They created Future Forward Ohio priorities, which match my own personal priorities, which, as we transition to a new agency, a cabinet agency now, happen to be the priorities of the governor. And so that's a good match, and that's a good alignment, and that's one of the reasons I chose to pursue this opportunity, is because in my career I served as a superintendent, a high school principal, director, all these kinds of things. Literacy has always been my one thing, because it's so fundamental. I even go so far sometimes to suggest that reading is a civil right. I mean, I feel that strongly about it, that it's so fundamental to everything we do. If you cannot read and write at grade level, you are behind, and your ability to catch up is compromised. And so I applaud the governor for coming out, and frankly, to be honest, Karen, one of the reasons that I really seriously considered the job is when he kind of put a stake in the ground around the science of reading. Well, not kind of, he put a stake in the ground around the science of reading. And I applauded him for that. Even when I was a citizen out there, I just thought that was bold, courageous, and it's the right thing to do for Ohio.
I want to get back to the science of reading, but I want to ask you while we're on this first topic, there are those who remember you as a former superintendent, former state school board member. You were superintendent for about 11 days, then signed a settlement agreement on ethics violations relating to that resignation. How did you go from that to this job? Were there any obstacles to getting the job after having served for those 11 daose?
Yeah, no, I don't know about obstacles per se. I think for me, after I went through those series of events, it was really kind of taking stock and taking a step back and just kind of clearing my head. And it was a difficult time for my wife and I, because I couldn't talk to anybody about it. But we got through it, did the settlement, which I think was the right thing to do. And then, as the legislation was out there percolating, I did keep an eye on that, and as it continued to evolve. And then to the point I just made about the governor doing what he did, I said, this is the opportunity that I think that I really want to invest I told the governor, I said, I wasn't looking for a job. I got pretty good at golf, because I had a lot of time to spend doing it. But I was looking to make a difference. I mean, that's what's driven me my entire career. And I think we really have an opportunity as a cabinet agency, working with other agencies and other entities in the state. And think about this, and I'll try not to talk too long here, but if we applied kind of a Marshall Plan approach to literacy in our state, where we leverage all the assets available to us in our state, not just educational assets, but community assets, and leverage it on this one goal. Think what we could do. And that's what's driven me to want to do this work.
The science of reading is an evidence-based way of teaching literacy that includes building blocks of words or phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and text comprehension. So all of that. It's being implemented in more than 30 states. What is different about that versus how Ohio kids have been learning?
Yeah, so, I'm old enough to have gone through the reading wars. I will tell you, as a superintendent in Reynoldsburg City, we implemented the components of the science of reading. We didn't call it the science of reading at that point in time. I'm not sure why we didn't call it that, but and it paid dividends for us. I mean, if you go back and look our kids' literacy rates, it was pretty impressive. And so there's no accident that 30-some states have done this. You know, we know more today about how the brain functions and how cognitive processes work than we've ever known before. It's a natural evolution and that's not to condemn anything that was done in the past, because we have more understanding now. And I suspect 5 years from now, we'll know even more. And I think that's a natural evolution of education, you know. And so I'm just happy to embrace it. Our challenge at the department is to work with others to implement now, with fidelity, the science of reading.
And you have to implement it through all the school districts around the state, all those all those school boards. Mm-hmm. Everybody's on board with this.
Well, I think, you know, I do think that the one issue that in times of, you know, maybe some challenges around partisan politics or divisions and all those things, this is the one issue that I think is bipartisan. I think this is the one issue that I would be shocked to learn that school board members and or superintendents would embrace, and that is ensuring kids can read at or above grade level through the system. This is just not an early childhood issue. This is an issue of early childhood, adolescent literacy, adult literacy, and I think that is something that people can rally behind.
There is a lawsuit that was filed by the Reading Recovery Council of North America, which is based in Ohio. They're claiming the science of reading provision in the state budget violates the single subject rule. Experts I've talked to have said they can't think of a time when that argument prevailed in court. But I want to ask you about the Reading Recovery Council's claims that their method, which is balanced literacy, works, and the move to the science of reading is political. I mean, is there a difference? What are the elements here, balanced literacy versus science of reading?
Yeah. So, you know, I'm not an attorney. You know, the great thing about our country, if you disagree, you can go ahead and take it through the court system, let the court system do what the court system does. I know, based on the research I've seen, that the science of reading produces results. Unequivocally produces results. And that's where I'm at, and that's where I'm going to stay. My job is to enforce the law. It is the law of Ohio to implement the science of reading. To me, it's as simple as that.
One of the things that changed too in the last year was the third grade reading guarantee, which has been with us for more than a decade, I think. Right. Now kids won't necessarily be held back. In fact, parents can opt out of their kids being held back if they do not pass that third grade reading test. Is the message here, though, that reading is important, or it's not important? I mean, that whole idea of the third grade reading guarantee was to make sure kids could read at third grade level before they could move on to getting out of picture books and into chapter books, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So, you know, I wasn't in those conversations that took place around the change in the law. I will say this, that the reading issues start well before third grade. And if you look at the changes in the law, it does require serious interventions to be put in place around a reading improvement plan for every kid who opts. If the parent opts to go ahead and promote them and they're not reading at grade level, then they're required, the district is required to provide successful evidence-based reading interventions until that child reaches grade level. So it's an ongoing process. So even if they go to fourth grade and at the end of fourth grade they're still not there, it follows them to fifth grade. And so I think they put some common sense guardrails around the issue of retention. But frankly, we've got to beef up our responsibilities K through 3 and ensure that we reduce the number of kids who are not reading at grade level. I think we have about 38% of our kids last year were not reading at grade level. And that's down a little bit from a previous year, but nonetheless is unacceptable. And so I think we really have to ratchet up our responses in the earlier grades. Listen, my wife and my daughter, and I mentioned my nieces, my wife taught reading for 30 plus years, and she taught at every level, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and so on. She could tell you right now in kindergarten who's going to be behind. and who is likely to stay behind if not intervene properly. And that's the issue at hand. We have to think differently about how we use time in the school, how we use talented teachers to intervene appropriately and quickly. And one of the great effect sizes that we've seen in the research is the leadership of the principal. That has the highest effect size on children's ability to read. And we often don't think about that. We think it's just a teacher issue. But the principal is so crucial in setting conditions in a building for both teachers and students to learn.
But when it comes to the teachers who actually have to perform this, they have to get trained. How long is it going to take to get all those teachers trained in the science of reading so this can all be implemented?
Well, I mean, listen, the legislature and the governor with this last biennium budget have done phenomenal investments in providing training, high quality professional development training for teachers, high quality instructional materials to be used. They made massive investments in these issues to ensure that we have the supports necessary to move forward.
Since you are the director of the agency, I want to ask you a couple more questions about the agency. One of the other things that was in the budget is the expansion of vouchers to universal vouchers. So any family that wants the state to provide financial assistance so they can send their kids to private school can get that. The response has been huge. There are questions about sustainability about that over time, but what kind of a challenge does this big response and having to deal with all these families that now want to get into this voucher expansion program, what's the challenge for the Department of Education and Workforce?
Well, I think the first thing is I can't be happier enough to embrace the notion that more parents have more choices. I've always been a parent advocate. I've always advocated for quality choices available to parents to make the kind of decisions that they think are in the best interest of their children. So the expansion of scholarship programs and availability of educational options to parents is something that I embrace and something that the agency will continue to embrace and build on. The expansion, we're just going through our applications now on the scholarship piece, so we don't have them fully vetted out. But I believe the number is about 150,000 applications right now. But again, we haven't vetted them all yet. So we don't know actually how many then will actually be eligible for the scholarship. But it is a dramatic increase over previous years.
Certainly the advocates for public schools will say that this expansion and even money that goes to charter schools comes at the cost of public schools. Do you feel that way?
Well, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe that the expansion was a separate appropriated line item. So I mean, people are going to choose to believe what they believe. I think in the end, as I've said, I want parents to have choices, and I want them to have quality choices. And I think, listen, I was a superintendent of a public school district. We provided choices at my district. We sponsored 5 community schools, charter schools. We had open enrollment, intra and inter-district open enrollment. I think choice is a good thing. And the thing I love most about choice is I think my experience has been when parents are free to make choices, they seem to own their choice, which makes them by definition more involved in their child. And who doesn't want more parent involvement in the education of their children?
I know you said you're not an attorney, but I have to come back to there is a lawsuit.
I always thought I was. But my daughter is an attorney. But yeah.
There is a lawsuit that's continuing over the transition from the Department of Education to the Department of Education and Workforce. The elected members of the state school board have filed that lawsuit, trying to stop it, saying it takes authority from the board away from them, takes authority away from voters who elected them. They fear it could result in the politicization of education and less independent oversight in education. And that was part of what was blamed for the scandal involving the electronic classroom of tomorrow, or ECOT. So how can parents and taxpayers be reassured that this move, where you are following the governor's priorities, will be still an independent agency that serves parents, serves kids?
Yeah, it is critical for us to have protocols in place where we get the kind of feedback that we need to hear directly from parents and other constituents. So we're required by law to have a public meeting at least once every 2 months, required by law. we intend to have a lot of the feedback loops that we already had as an agency prior to the transition in place to get feedback from constituents. We will continue to do that. The state board, we have to have a good relationship with the state board and Superintendent Kraft. I happen to know Paul for the last 20 years or so. He and I have a great relationship. The state board will provide feedback. I mean, they have an open forum. They have an opportunity for parents to come to them. I'll work with Paul and we'll get that feedback back to us. So communication is so essential. Two-way communication is so essential. You're in the communication business and you know how important it is. And I can assure you that we will have the channels of communication that avail ourselves both for feedback and for information sharing.